I grew up on the outer edge of a small town in Ohio, in a weather-worn two-story house that smelled of laundry detergent and fried bacon in the mornings. Our mailbox leaned slightly to one side, like it, too, had given up on standing tall. Inside lived my parents, my twin brother Nathan, and me. People used to tell my mother that twins were a blessing. She'd smile politely and reply, "Yes, they're a handful." But deep down, she and my father had already decided which hand was worth holding. Nathan was the golden child. He was the one with straight A's, the one my dad called our little prodigy. I was the girl who loved to climb trees, dribble a basketball until dusk, and bring home stray kittens. My report cards were good, but never exceptional. My parents spoke about Nathan's science fair ribbons like they were Olympic medals. My soccer trophies collected dust in the back of my closet because Mom didn't want all that clutter on the mantel. On our 14th birthday, the difference between us felt like a canyon. Nathan had a party planned in the living room, balloons, a cake from the nicest bakery in town, every classmate invited. My mother spent days planning it. For me, she said she'd do something small later. That something turned into nothing. My friends, sensing the awkwardness, picked me up and took me for ice cream instead. I still remember the taste of mint chocolate chip that night, the way the cold creaminess dulled the sting of being forgotten. Grandma Helen was the only person who seemed to see me. She'd drive in from Columbus once a month, always in her blue Buick with the air freshener shaped like a daisy. She'd bring me peanut butter fudge wrapped in wax paper and slip a $5 bill into my palm like we were co-conspirators. "For something sweet just for you," she'd whisper. Those visits were oxygen. At home, the rules were ironclad. No friends over. No phones after 8. Homework before dinner. Nathan could bend them, stay up late studying, disappear with friends, and my parents turned a blind eye. I learned early that I couldn't. One spring afternoon in sophomore year, I downloaded Snapchat on my cheap Android phone, just to keep up with my friends. It felt like a small rebellion, like carving my initials into the underside of the school bleachers. My parents found out within hours. Nathan must have told them, and the explosion that followed was like a tornado ripping through our kitchen. My dad's face turned a violent red as he threw my backpack against the wall. My mom yanked the door off my bedroom hinges and declared, "No privacy until you earn our trust." Standing there, stripped of even a door, I felt like an inmate. Nathan hovered in the doorway, a smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. He'd learned to weaponize my parents' anger. If he stole a 20 from Dad's wallet, he'd tell them I did it. If something went missing, he'd point at me. They believed him automatically. At school, he started muttering things about me to his friends. I didn't think much of it at first, teenage gossip. But then I noticed the way people's eyes changed when they looked at me. Conversations stopped when I approached. Invitations to hangouts evaporated. By autumn, the rumors were bolder, that I was violent, that I hit Nathan at home, that I was jealous of him. He even showed up at school one day with a black eye. I knew he'd done it to himself. His knuckles were scraped, his story didn't add up. But to everyone else, it was proof. Teachers started treating me like a ticking bomb. One morning, my best friend wouldn't meet my eyes in the hallway. When I cornered her after math class, she told me what Nathan had been saying. Her voice trembled with pity and disgust. My stomach dropped as she described lies I would never even think of inventing. That night, I confronted Nathan in the kitchen. The overhead light buzzed faintly, casting him in a harsh glow. "Why are you doing this?" I whispered. He didn't answer at first, just stirred his cereal. Then he looked up and said, "You deserve to rot alone." It was like being punched in the chest. I thought about going to my parents, but I already knew the script. They'd believe him, not me. So I stayed quiet and tried to endure. Each day felt like walking a gauntlet of whispers and sideways glances. I sat alone at lunch. I stopped trying out for sports. My world shrank to my room, doorless though it was, and the few hours at Grandma Helen's when she could sneak me away. Looking back, the signs were all there, but at 14 you think every storm will blow over. You don't yet realize some storms are moving in to stay. Freshman year had tasted like chlorinated water and cinnamon gum, pool practices after school, giggling in the girls' locker room, borrowing mascara before homeroom. Sophomore year tasted like pennies. That metallic tang would slide into my mouth every time I caught someone whispering, every time a teacher's eyes landed on my hands as if they were weapons. I kept count at first. 2 kids whispered outside algebra. 3 exchanged looks when I set my lunch tray down. 5, then 9, then too many. The numbers fattened until they were a swarm that stung whenever I moved. The rumor had 1,000 sharp little versions. In the cafeteria, she threw a hairbrush at him. In the band room, she slammed his locker shut on his hand. In the parking lot, she shoved him down the stairs, but he covered for her 'cause, family. Nathan didn't fan the flames in public. He didn't have to. He floated down the hall with a martyr's small, stoic smile. If someone asked, he'd touch the purple sickle blooming under his eye and say, "It's nothing." That was the hook. It's nothing was always the hook. I tried to be louder than the story. I showed up early and stayed late. I volunteered to clean up science lab. I spoke gently, even when I wanted to scream. I thought if I could be unassailable, the lie would get bored and move on. Coach Reeves pulled me aside after PE one day. "You okay, kiddo?" he said, knuckles on his hips, sweat darkening the collar of his polo. "I'm fine," I lied. His eyes flitted to the faint crescent of a bruise on my shin from missing a step on the bleachers. He flinched like he'd caught me stealing. "If you need to talk to someone—" "About tripping on the bleachers?" I asked, heat climbing my neck. "About anything," he said. And then he let me go, because there were 24 other girls waiting to run their mile while someone's playlist chewed through a top 40 hit. By October, the hallways smelled like wet wool and pencil shavings. My best friend from middle school, Kayla, had begun to walk a half step ahead of me, like distance itself could absolve her. We were sliding apart the way photograph corners curl in a damp basement. Slow, inevitable, impossible to stop once it starts. "I don't want to be mean," she said one morning by the trophy case, "but is any of it true?" She couldn't look at me. The glass behind her reflected a warped version of us. 2 girls, same height, same frizz halo thanks to Ohio humidity, suddenly from different planets. "Kayla," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "it's my twin brother. The worst thing I've ever done to him is eat his last Pop-Tart." She laughed, a hiccupy sound, reflexive and guilty. Then she looked at the bruise under Nathan's eye as he and his friends moved past us like a weather front. I could almost see her toggling between the me she used to know and the stories she'd been handed. It was no contest. Stories are flashier. They come with props. That evening, when I pushed open our front door, the smell of sautéed onions slapped me in the face. Mom had the news on low and the burner up high. "Set the table," she said without a hello. "Your brother needs to study. Don't distract him." I set plates. I folded paper towels into triangles because we were out of napkins. The TV droned about a storm pushing across the Midwest. Nathan wandered in with a textbook open and a fresh constellation of faint red marks on his forearm, like he'd leaned into a rosebush. Mom made a noise that wasn't quite a gasp, wasn't quite a word. She reached for him with wet hands. "What happened?" she demanded. He gave the barest shrug. "It's nothing." Later, lying in my bed, door gone, room open to the hallway like a storefront display, I stared at the ceiling fan until my eyes hurt. The house settled and creaked the way old houses do when they pretend they're ships. In the stripe of light from the hall nightlight, dust motes rose and sank like glitter in water. Each time the floorboards groaned, I thought it was Nathan coming to stand in the doorway and look at me the way he'd looked across the kitchen table, as if he'd been ordained to be my judge and jury. 2 days later, the summons came. "Principal Carter wants to see you," Ms. Delgado said in English, holding a pink slip like a tiny flag of surrender. Her eyebrows were soft with concern. "He asked for Nathan, too." The walk to the office felt like a mile, even though it was 90 steps. I counted because it helped to pin the world to something measurable. The secretary, Mrs. Fenway, wore her usual blazer with the enamel apple pin. "Go right in," she said, and in the way she wouldn't meet my eyes, I knew that the story had made it to the grown-ups too. Principal Carter's office had that specific school smell: coffee gone cold, toner, old carpet, and a poster of a bald eagle that had been curling at the corners since the Bush administration. Nathan sat in one leather chair, hands folded, a picture from a pamphlet about promising youth. Mom and Dad were on the couch. Mom clutched a wad of tissues. Dad looked like a statue of a man too angry to blink. "Thank you for coming," Principal Carter said, steepling his fingers. He had the voice people use when they're trying to guide a deer out of a grocery store. "We've had several reports." "Lies," I blurted, before he'd finished. He blinked, and I heard how desperate I sounded. "Let's take turns," he said. "Nathan, why don't you start by telling us what's been going on at home?" Nathan inhaled delicately, like an actor taking their first breath on stage. "It's been hard," he said, and looked down. "I think she gets frustrated." "She?" Dad barked. "You mean your sister?" Nathan's throat bobbed. "My sister," he said. "She gets frustrated sometimes, about how our parents—" He let it hang there artfully. "And then she takes it out on me." Mom let out a sound like air escaping a balloon. She reached for him. "My poor boy." "Show him," Dad said. "The eye." Nathan touched the bruise that had faded to a jaundiced yellow. An artifact. A souvenir. He rolled up his sleeve and presented the arm too, with the rosebush scratches that were not, in fact, rosebush scratches. Even from across the office, I could see the linearity of the marks, the way they tracked the particular angle of fingernails you dig into your own skin when the mirror is your accomplice. "May I speak?" I asked, and my voice came out small. "In a moment," Principal Carter said gently. "Nathan, when did this start?" "A while ago," Nathan said. "I didn't want to get her in trouble." "What a good brother," Mom whispered. Something in me snapped a little. It wasn't loud. It didn't break my posture. It was the clean sound a twig makes when you're not watching where you step in the woods. "He's lying," I said. "He's been lying for months." "Nathan doesn't lie," Dad said, like it was a fact printed in a manual. His jaw jutted. He had that look he got when our neighbor's dog barked too long, like inconvenience itself was a personal insult. "Let her speak," Principal Carter said. He gestured at me with an open palm. "Go ahead." I told them everything. The day Mom unhinged my door, the $20 bill I didn't take, the Pop-Tart, the way Nathan's stories had unfurled at school and grown legs of their own, how Kayla had asked me if any of it was true and looked at me like I was a foreign language she used to speak. "If you really want proof," I said, hands shaking, "look at the pattern of his bruises. Look at his knuckles. Look at the timing. They appear after he's closed in his room for an hour, and then, boom, new bruise the next day at school. He's making them. He's hurting himself." Mom gasped like I'd confessed to arson. "Horrible," she whispered, staring at me as if I'd just sprouted horns. "Enough," Dad said, and slapped his knee as if the thigh was a bell. "I will not sit here and listen to my daughter make up medical mystery stories to cover her behavior." "Mr. Carter," I said, pivoting, "if I could just get the adult in the room on my side, the dominoes would fall the other way. Please, I don't want to be dramatic. This isn't true. I haven't laid a hand on him, not once." Principal Carter threaded and unthreaded his fingers. In the dead zone between his words, the wall clock ticked so loudly, it sounded like it had migrated inside my skull. "We don't take allegations of bullying lightly," he said finally. "We also don't take false accusations lightly. But there have been multiple reports. Reports of what people think they saw after he showed them a bruise he gave himself," I said, and my voice cracked on himself. He looked sad in a way that didn't help me. given the volume of concern, he said, and until we have clarity, we're going to issue a 10-day suspension. This is provisional. It's meant to be restorative, not punitive. He used words like a padded room. 10 days, Mom repeated, like saying the number made it more real, like it was an angel's name that would keep our house safe. I felt the room tilt. You're suspending me for something I didn't do. We have to think about the safety of all students, he said. We'll expect you back after the suspension to meet with Ms. Finch, our counselor, and with me. Dad stood as if propelled by a spring. Finally, he said, exploding with a righteous relief that made bile climb my throat. Finally, someone is taking this seriously. I'm taking this seriously, I said, but the moment for that sentence had passed. It fell like a penny into a fountain, gone, irretrievable, insufficient. Mom squeezed Nathan's hand. He looked saintly. If anyone had walked by right then and peered into the office window, they would have seen exactly what the story wanted them to see. A brave boy, his tender mother, a firm father, a reluctant authority figure, and me, jaw tight, eyes bright with tears, fitting too neatly into the silhouette of the villain. They made me hand over my student ID badge as if it were a passport to a country I'd abused. You can collect it when you return, Mrs. Fenway said at the front desk, and she slid me a copy of the suspension letter with a paperclip the color of rust. In the parking lot, the air had that Ohio in November bite, a clean cold that made the world look like it had been polished. Our car was angled crookedly across two spots. Dad always parked like rules were for other people. We all climbed in. No one buckled right away. The silence had a mass. You've embarrassed this family, Dad said as he cranked the engine. You've embarrassed your brother. You've embarrassed your mother. Embarrassed? I asked. The word felt thin, wrong-sized. I've been walking down that hallway alone for months. Good, he said, shifting into reverse. Gives you time to think. Mom sniffled. She dabbed the corner of her eye even though she hadn't cried. We tried to raise you right. The ride home was 15 minutes long and an hour deep. Fields slid by, stubbled with corn stalks that looked like rows of broken pencils. The sky had that low pewter lid that made you feel like your thoughts were echoing. Nathan sat behind Dad and watched my reflection in the windshield, as if he were measuring me for something. We pulled into the driveway, our leaning mailbox like a drunk sentry, and the garage door groaned up. Dad didn't even cut the engine before he was out of the car, moving toward the house like a storm cloud walking on legs. I stayed buckled. Mom unsnapped her seatbelt and twisted to face me. You're going to apologize, she said. You're going to mean it. To whom? My voice came out hoarse. To the rumor? To your brother, she said. To us, to Mr. Carter, to whomever it takes to make this right. The house felt colder than outside. Dad headed straight to my room, and for a weird, weightless second, I thought he was going to put my door back on its hinges, like the past hour had knocked some sense into him. Instead, he went to my closet and yanked my suitcase from the top shelf so hard it rained old dust and a forgotten scrunchie. Dad? I said, but he was already unzipping, already reaching for the stack of jeans, the shirts I'd folded 3 days before when Mom had barked that I was letting my drawers get sloppy. Pack, he said. He didn't look at me. You're going to your grandmother's for a while. A while? I echoed. He jammed socks into the suitcase like he was stuffing a mouth. As long as it takes. Nathan leaned in the doorway the way he had the night I confronted him in the kitchen, only now he had an audience. He lifted an eyebrow like a curtain. She'll like that, he said. She can have all the privacy she wants. Oh, wait. He smirked toward the hinge scars on my wall. Guess she's not used to doors. Out, Mom snapped at him, which might have been the kindest thing she did for me that day. He sauntered away, not out of obedience, but boredom. He had other scenes to star in. Please, I said, because I didn't know what else to say. It's a small word that feels like a raft. It never looks dignified. Please listen to me. Dad stopped packing long enough to look up. His eyes were the same shade as mine, muddy hazel, but there was none of me in them. You're not the victim here, he said. Your brother is." I could feel something inside me trying to calcify, trying to build coral out of all this salt water. I thought of Grandma Helen's hands, the way her knuckles had grown like knots on a tree, the way she patted the passenger seat belt whenever I got in her Buick. "For something sweet, just for you," she always said when she slipped me a little cash. It occurred to me that the sweetest thing in the world right now might be a room with a door. Dad zipped the suitcase. The teeth meshed like a zipper on a new skin I hadn't asked to wear. He set it in the foyer with a thump that reverberated up into my ribs. "Call your grandmother," he said to Mom. "Tell her to come get her." Her. Not me. Not his daughter. Her. Mom reached for the phone, then paused and looked at me. For a heartbeat, I saw a crack somewhere back in her, a snapshot of the day she'd dressed us alike in matching overalls and taken a picture on the porch steps, one kid on each thigh, each of us with a fistful of Cheerios. Then the crack sealed itself. She dialed. While we waited, I sat on the bottom stair with my arms wrapped around my middle, like my body was suddenly a package that had to be kept intact. The clock over the fireplace clicked like it had earlier, relentless and smug. Outside, a crow hopped along the fence and said something crude to the cold air. When Grandma Helen's Buick slid into the driveway, I stood so fast my knee cracked. She came up the walk with her purse tucked under her arm like a shield. She was not tall, but she had the presence of something taller. An oak, maybe, or a memory of one. "What's this?" she asked without looking at me, eyes on my father. Years of Ohio politeness put a varnish on her voice, but underneath I could hear steel. "We need a reset," Dad said. "Some consequences. She can stay with you for the suspension." Grandma's gaze flicked to my face, saw the saline glitter, the chapped lower lip I'd been worrying with my teeth, and then back to Dad. She took a breath so slow it looked like a meditation. "No," she said softly, and then louder. "No. What you need is to stop doing harm." Mom's hand fluttered. "Mother." "Don't mother me," Grandma said, eyes never leaving Dad's. "Get her coat." No one moved. The house seemed to listen. "Now," Grandma said, and I watched the improbable happen. My father walked to the closet and took down my coat. He handed it to me like it was evidence that might burn him. "Thank you," I said to Grandma, and my voice broke on the second word. She turned to me then, her face softening so quickly it made me dizzy. "Come on, sugar," she said. "You'll ride with me." I threaded my arms into sleeves and felt the familiar way of winter on my shoulders. Dad opened his mouth like he was about to append conditions, curfew, attitude, tone. But Grandma lifted one finger and he closed it again, biting down on whatever rule wanted to march out. We stepped into the cold. The air bit my cheeks and, for a second, the bite felt better than anything inside. As I crossed the threshold, Nathan appeared at the top of the stairs like a figure on a balcony at the end of Act 1. He looked down at me and smiled with all his teeth. Grandma didn't look back. She clicked the Buick's key fob, and the car gave its little obedient chirp. "Seat belt," she said as I slid in. She patted the strap, the ritual as steady as breath. I buckled, and the belt snicked across my chest like a promise. She circled the car and got in on her side. For a moment, we just sat there, windows fogging with our breath, the shape of the house wobbly through the glass. "You're not alone," she said. I tried to answer, but the words were too big. They knocked around in my throat, looking for exits. Instead, I nodded, and she nodded back as if I'd said the right thing, as if I'd spoken a language she knew better than English. She put the Buick in reverse. The tires whispered on the driveway. The mailbox leaned and watched us go. At the corner, she paused at the stop sign, even though there was no traffic. Snow dusted the edge of the cornfield like someone had sifted powdered sugar over the world. "We'll stop for groceries," she said. "We'll make chili. We'll call your aunt. We'll make a plan." "Okay," I said, and for a single, long blink I could see the plan. Just the outline. A room with a door, nights without whispers, mornings that didn't start with accusations. A table where my seat was not a mistake. Grandma turned onto County Road 18. As the house fell away in the rearview mirror, my phone buzzed with a text from a number I knew by heart. Nathan, don't get too comfortable. I stared at the message until the words went double, then tucked the phone face down in my pocket. Seatbelt, Grandma said again, not because I'd unbuckled, but because this was how she blessed journeys. I pressed my palm to the cool plastic latch like a vow. We drove toward town. The sky pressed low, troweled flat by wind. On the radio, a woman with a sultry voice sang about leaving and never looking back. I watched the field stream by and thought, let this be the last time I have to prove I'm not a monster. Let this be the last time a story chooses me without my consent. It wouldn't be. Not yet. The storm hadn't finished with me. But in the Buick's warm cabin, chilly and plans on the horizon, Grandma's knuckles at 10 and 2, I felt the first small, defiant heat of something I hadn't felt in months. Hope, yes, but also something sharper. Resolve. Grandma's apartment sat above a hardware store on Main Street, a slice of second-floor brick with windows that faced the courthouse green. The stairs up were narrow and smelled like old pine and the faint ghost of popcorn from the movie theater 2 doors down. Inside, the place was small enough that if you stood in the hallway and stretched your arms, your fingertips nearly brushed both walls. But it had a door on my room, a real door, with a brass knob that clicked when you turned it, and that was better than any square footage. We stopped for groceries on the way over like she'd promised. At Miller's, she steered the cart with her purse still tucked under her arm, the way some people keep a hand on a toddler in a crowd. She asked what I liked in my chili, beans or no beans, ground turkey or beef, and I said anything, because anything that wasn't the past was fine. She bought oyster crackers and a bag of shredded cheddar and the cheap kind of sour cream I liked that came with a peel-back lid. At the checkout, she added a small, silly bouquet of daisies from the bucket near the door and passed it to me without comment, as if we always bought flowers on Tuesdays. Her apartment was warm in a way our house had never been. There were crocheted blankets draped over the couch and a hummingbird calendar in the kitchen with appointments written in tidy blue script. Dentist 2 p.m., book club 6:30, Aunt Lou's birthday, call. My room had once been her sewing room. There was still a jar of buttons on the dresser, and the bed was a fold-out with a mattress that puffed like a marshmallow. I ran my palm over the comforter. It wasn't new. It was clean. While the chili simmered, she set me to rinsing beans at the sink. Outside, late suns stitched the edges of the courthouse statue in gold thread. People drifted past on the sidewalk, bundled against the cold. Somewhere below us, someone laughed, and a dog set off after the sound as if he could chase it down and bring it back. "You can stay as long as you need," Grandma said, wooden spoon in hand. "There's no clock on your healing." I'd never had anyone use the word healing about me. It made something inside my chest both ache and loosen. "Thank you," I said. I wanted to say more, to offer reasons I'd be good and quiet and small, but she wasn't asking for my defense. She was offering a home. After dinner, she insisted we watch Jeopardy and shout answers at the TV. She knew the state capitals and the hymn lyrics categories, cold, and smiled when I nailed photosynthesis before the contestants. "See?" she said, nudging my shoulder. "Brains enough for 2. That night, I slept so hard I woke with the taste of sleep itself on my tongue, metallic and sweet, like the inside of a mailbox after rain. I lay there for a few seconds and looked at the band of light under the door. A door, I thought, and I closed my eyes and opened them again just to be sure it was still there. The next morning, Grandma made oatmeal on the stove with a pinch of salt and sliced bananas. "After breakfast, we'll visit the school," she said. "No pressure, just see our options." "Won't Mom and Dad—" I began and stopped. The sentence didn't know where to go. "They will be fine," she said. "And if they're not, they can call me. You're not walking back into that place unless you feel safe. Understood?" I nodded. The oatmeal smelled like cinnamon. The spoon was a little bent from years of stirring. I thought of the spoons at home, nested perfectly, all stamped with the same year from the same department store registry. There was more comfort in this little bent one than in all of those. The guidance counselor at River Street High wore a cardigan the color of a watermelon's rind and had a desk plant she kept turning so it wouldn't lean too hard toward the window. Her name was Ms. York. She asked gentle, practical questions about my credits and electives and whether I preferred English or science and if I had a favorite book. When I couldn't answer the last one, my throat filling with the sudden, stupid panic that maybe I didn't have favorites anymore, she smiled and said, "That just means we get to go exploring." By the time we left, I had a schedule printed on green paper and a student ID badge on a lanyard with the school's Riverhawk logo. Ms. York had given me 3 bathroom passes, a map that made the school look like a friendly spaceship, and the names of 2 girls she thought might be kind. "Look for a tall one with a high ponytail," she said. "That's Jamila. She's a peach. And Laurel sits near the front in English and draws constellations in the margins of her notes. If you need anything, you come find me." I held the map on my lap in the Buick and traced my finger from the main entrance to the library. The line I drew was crooked. It didn't matter. Crooked still gets you there. The first day at River Street, I wore jeans and my softest sweatshirt with the Ohio State logo because Ohio likes to know you belong. I arrived early and stood in the hallway pretending to study the trophy case so I wouldn't look like a person who didn't know where to stand. The glass held teams from years I hadn't been alive yet. Mullets and scrunch socks, girls with bangs sprayed into architecture. I could see my face doubled on the glass. I wasn't sure which reflection to believe. "New?" a voice said. I turned and a girl with a ponytail that could have qualified as a weapon smiled at me. "I'm Jamila," she said. "Ms. York told me to watch for you. You're here." She said the last words like a little hooray. "I'm here," I said, surprised at how much those 2 words steadied me. "Come on," Jamila said. "English is this way." In English, Miss Patel had arranged the desks in a U, so we had to look at each other when we spoke. There were posters on the walls, one with a stack of books shaped like a city skyline, one with a quote from Audre Lorde, "When I dare to be powerful." "What's your name?" Miss Patel asked. She said it like she was asking what song I had stuck in my head. I told her, and she said, "Welcome. We're finishing To Kill a Mockingbird, but don't panic. You'll add your voice. Laurel." She nodded at a girl near the front with curls and a pencil tucked above her ear. "Can you share your notes?" Laurel slid a spiral notebook toward me, the margins full of galaxies. Later, during silent reading, she whispered, "I draw stars when I don't know how to say what I'm thinking." She smiled at her page. Sometimes constellations can say it better. At lunch, Jamila waved me over to a table near the windows where the light fell low and made everyone look a little holy. She introduced me to a boy who could solve a Rubik's Cube in under a minute and a girl who carried hot sauce in her backpack. We traded chip bags and stories. When the bell rang, Jamila said, "Meet you by the doors after last period. We walk the same way." I kept waiting for the rumor to catch me like a burr. It didn't, at least not that day or the next. There were stares. New faces always draw them. But they were curious, not cutting. In the library, the librarian stamped due dates with an enthusiasm that made the ink look darker. "Do you like poetry?" she asked, and handed me a slim book by Mary Oliver without waiting for an answer. "Take this home." At night, back in the apartment, Grandma and I found a rhythm. She played old records while she cooked. Patsy Cline, Billie Holiday, a gospel quartet whose harmonies folded into each other like bread dough. I did homework at the little kitchen table with the hummingbird calendar and the jar of buttons and the good light. When it snowed, we stood at the window with our mugs and watched the courthouse green turn from brown to white. The world muffled itself. For once, I welcomed the quiet. On Saturdays, we did laundry together in the basement of the building, the machines chugging like friendly engines. She told me stories about raising my mom, how they'd used cloth diapers because money was tight, how my mother had once run away to the tree in the front yard and announced she was never coming down, how she'd always been so careful with her hair. "I don't know where that careful went," Grandma said, sorting socks. "Some people misplace it." On Sundays, If it wasn't too bitter outside, we walked to the little park behind the library and counted dogs. She knew many by name. "That's Benny. He begs. That one is Margot. She pretends not to see you unless you have treats." We never stayed long. The cold worked its way through our coats and nipped at our wrists where mittens ended and sleeves began. But the walking mattered. You can march sorrow out of your body that way, one stride at a time. Sometimes the past snuck in anyway. I'd be studying and a scent would blot the room, Dad's aftershave, Nathan's shampoo, and my pulse would bang like someone knocking from the inside of my throat. I learned to breathe through it, to look at the door and remind myself it would open only when I wanted it to. If the panic still crested, I'd pad into the living room and find Grandma knitting with the TV on low. "Bad wave?" she'd ask, fingers still moving. "Bad wave," I'd say. She'd pat the cushion beside her. "Ride it out, sugar." I got a part-time job shelving books at the library after Ms. York mentioned they were hiring. The pay was minimum wage and 2 blissful hours of quiet. I learned the Dewey Decimals by feel, the way you learn the height of a curb on your own street. On my second week, a little boy with a hat shaped like a shark asked if I could help him find the dinosaur that eats a car. I led him to T-Rex versus Car Wash, and he looked at me like I'd conjured a miracle. "You're welcome," I said, and felt the miracle land somewhere inside me and stay. The apartment had thin walls. On Friday nights, the hardware store owners would drag the displays in and thump the back door, and Saturday mornings, a clatter of pipes and someone whistling out of tune woke us early. I didn't mind. The noises were honest. They were not whispers. River Street had a winter formal. Jamila told me I could go with a group if I wanted. No pressure, she said, the same way Grandma had said it about school. We eat too many breadsticks and take bad pictures in someone's living room and leave early because the DJ is always trash. "I don't have a dress," I said. "You have a body," she said. "We'll work around that." Grandma took me to the church rummage sale on Saturday morning like it was a treasure hunt. The fellowship hall smelled like old Tupperware and lemon cleaner. Tables sagged under the weight of other people's once-loved things. Photo frames with smiling strangers, teacups whose saucers had escaped, ceramic Christmas villages missing their tiny lampposts. We found a dress in a shade of green I'd never worn, the color of pine needles and old wine bottles. It fit better than anything new could have. "It's $5, the volunteer said, and tucked a pair of rhinestone earrings into the bag, just because. When I came out of the bathroom at the apartment, dress on, hair curled with Grandma's ancient hot rollers, she put her hand to her mouth. "I knew you were beautiful," she said, "but now it's official. I didn't expect to dance much." Jamila and Laurel and I formed a triangle and swayed and laughed at the light-up centerpieces like they were rare animals on display. A boy from my history class asked me if I wanted punch and came back with 2 cups and a joke I don't remember because I was too busy memorizing the normalness of it all. The way the gym smelled like gym and cheap cologne, the squeak of a shoe on the floor, the glitter of Laurel's mascara catching the light when she tilted her head. In the bathroom, a girl I'd seen in Spanish class stood at the mirror, reapplying lipstick. "I like your earrings," she said. And I almost told her the rummage sale story, the volunteer with the soft hands, the way kindness shows up tucked slyly in bags. Instead, I said, "Thanks," and let the compliment land without deflecting it into a joke. It felt like standing still in a warm draft. Not every day was a victory. Some mornings I woke with a dream fog in which the principal's office kept replicating like a funhouse, every door opening to the same room where I was always already guilty. On those days, I moved slower. I told myself that slower is not the same as stopped. I learned to bring little things back with me from the good days and tuck them in my pockets like talismans. The weight of the library stamp in my hand, the taste of Grandma's chili heavy with cumin, Jamila's ponytail flashing like a metronome in the hall, Laurel's galaxies in the margins marching off the page. A week after the winter formal, I was shelving returns when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. The bubble sat there, pale and waiting. I pinched the bridge of my nose. There are things that feel like choices and things that don't. I opened it. "Mom, Your grandmother says you're doing okay. We want to talk. I stared at the rectangle of words until the letters started to float. The librarian cleared her throat from the desk, and I realized I'd been standing with a book suspended between the A's and the B's for too long. I slipped it onto the shelf and went out to the stairs, where the stairwell light hummed and the brick held a steady, silent line. I typed and erased. Typed and erased. Finally, I wrote, "I'm safe with Grandma. I'll let you know when I'm ready." I didn't hit send. I put the phone back in my pocket and walked the rest of the way to the bottom shelf, knelt, and slid a book into place. The bottom shelves are the most humble and the most satisfying. They are where people rarely look, which makes them perfect. When my shift ended, Grandma was waiting in the Buick, hands at 10 and 2 even in the parking lot. There was a paper bag on the back seat with a loaf of bread peeking out. "Chicken noodle tonight," she said. I felt like soup. I told her about the text, about how my thumb hovered over send, like a helicopter that didn't know where to land. She listened, and when I finished, she nodded, slow and sure. "Control," she said, turning the word over like a coin. "This is you having some." I sent the message after dinner, when the soup bowls were stacked in the sink and the apartment smelled like thyme. My phone pinged almost immediately. "Mom, we love you." I didn't have an answer for that. Love is a word that gets borrowed a lot and returned damaged. I set the phone face down and pulled my homework toward me. On the corner of my English notebook, I drew a little constellation where there wasn't one, a cluster of dots I connected just because I could. In March, ice melted off the sidewalks and Main Street puddled into mirrors. Grandma and I started leaving the window cracked during the day to let the apartment exhale. I learned where the downtown pigeons spent the night and which shop owners put out bowls of water for dogs. The world made a little more sense because the rules were small and knowable. Once at the grocery store, I turned a corner and nearly collided with Ms. Delgado from my old school. She reached for my elbow in that reflex everyone has when there's almost a crash. For a second, we just looked at each other over a stack of canned tomatoes. "Hi," she said finally. She looked tired in the way teachers look in March. "How are you, kiddo?" "Okay," I said, and meant it. "I heard things were rough," she said. "I'm sorry." I could have told her everything. I could have laid the bruise pattern logic at her feet like a forensic report. Instead, I said, "I like my new English teacher." She smiled. "Good," she said. "Read everything, even the stuff that bores you." At the checkout, the cashier tucked a piece of candy in Grandma's bag with a wink. "For something sweet just for you," he said to me, and I nearly laughed because the world was saying our line back to us. Spring break came, and with it a week of no homework and longer afternoons. Grandma taught me how to plant herbs in old coffee cans on the fire escape, basil, mint, a stubborn little rosemary that took its time. We had to carry watering cans through the kitchen and pretend not to drip on the linoleum. The first day the mint opened its new leaves, the whole corner of the kitchen smelled green and clean. "Put a sprig in your tea," Grandma said. "Healing." I went back to school with dirt still crescented under my nails and the sense that I was becoming someone again. Not the girl I was before, she'd always been squinting into someone else's light, but a person who could root and grow in a narrow space and still be beautiful. Of course, life isn't a neat braid. Some strands stay loose. On the last day of April, Jamila stood in front of my locker with her ponytail down, which meant she was serious. "I have to tell you something," she said. "I didn't want to be the person who brings bad news, but—" I stepped closer. The hallway smelled like pencil shavings and hand soap. "What is it?" "Nathan," she said quietly, and the name landed in my stomach like a stone. "He messaged someone I know from my church youth group. He's been asking about you, about where you live, asking if you're—" She made a face. "It doesn't matter what he asked. It's gross." The old panic rose fast and familiar. I pressed my palm flat against the cool locker door like it was a wall I could lean on. "Okay," I said. I felt like I was speaking through a snorkel. "Thank you for telling me." "We can talk to Ms. York," she said. "Or Ms. Patel, or my mom, or all of them." I swallowed hard. "I'll tell my grandma. We'll figure it out." We did. We called Grandma from the library's landline like spies. She met me after school and we walked the long way home, past the bakery that put out day-old muffins for 50 cents. She listened while I said the words, and when I was done, she paused and then said, "Okay." Then, "Seatbelt," out of habit, even though we were walking. I laughed a shaky laugh that turned into a real one. That night, she filled out a form online to ask for a number change for our landline. She showed me how to block numbers I didn't recognize. She printed a page from a state website about harassment and put it in a folder labeled "Just in Case," and then, because she was who she was, filed it in a drawer, but not before telling me where it was. The next morning, the sun came up like it always does. First pink, then brave. I made toast and burned one slice and ate it anyway. In English, Ms. Patel wrote a sentence fragment on the board, "Walking home in the rain," and asked us to finish it 3 different ways. I wrote 3, then a 4th. Laurel leaned over, pointed at the last one, and nodded like there. After class, Jamila hooked her arm through mine and said, "We've got you." When I got home, the mint on the fire escape had put out 2 new leaves. They were small and stubborn and perfectly green. I pinched one, rolled it between my fingers, and breathed in. Then I went inside, closed my door, the click still new enough to feel like magic, and sat at the little desk with the hummingbird calendar and the jar of buttons. I opened a blank notebook and wrote my name at the top of the first page, not as a student or a suspect, but as the author. I didn't yet know that the story I'd start in that notebook would carry me out of that apartment and onto airplanes, into conference rooms and coffee shops and living rooms in cities I couldn't spell without help, that it would let me build a life held up not by someone else's version of me, but by my own words. I only knew that the pen felt right in my hand, and that for the first time in a long time, the future felt less like a hallway and more like a room with a window I could open whenever I wanted. I wrote, "Before the storm, I learned to sleep with my shoes by the bed. Then I crossed it out. I wrote, I learned to love doors. Then, I learned to love the person who closed them gently behind her and kept the key. Grandma tapped on my door then and cracked it just enough to slide in a plate with a brownie on it. The top crackled like a tiny dry lake. 'For something sweet just for you,' she said, and closed the door carefully, respectfully, like a librarian closing a rare book. I ate the brownie in 3 greedy bites and licked the powdered sugar from my thumb and went back to the page. Outside, the courthouse bells rang the hour. Pigeons fussed on the ledge. The chili from last night flavored the apartment with comfort. I took another breath of mint and ink and pencil shavings. Then I started the chapter that would become my next life. I left Grandma's apartment on a warm August morning with 2 suitcases and a heart that felt like it was both breaking and flying. She hugged me twice at the bus station and tucked a 20 into my pocket the way she always had. "For something sweet just for you," she said. The bus hissed, and when I climbed aboard, it smelled like vinyl and diesel and possibility. College was 3 hours south, a mid-sized campus in Kentucky with brick buildings and oak trees older than statehood. My dorm room had beige walls and a view of the practice fields. It also had a door that locked from the inside. I turned the key 3 times that first night, just because I could. No one here knew my name. No one here knew the rumor. In the dining hall, I could sit anywhere. In class, no one eyed my hands. The freedom was dizzying. I joined an intramural soccer team. I ate pizza at midnight. I stayed up in the library until it closed just to breathe the quiet. Money was tight, so I went looking for work. The campus job board led me to a professor who needed someone to edit blog posts for her research lab. $10 a post. Then another client. Then another. By winter break, I had a small list of regulars and a PayPal balance big enough to buy my own textbooks. I realized I wasn't just good at writing. I liked it. Sitting at a cafe table with my laptop felt like putting bricks into a wall that would hold me up someday. I still called Grandma every Sunday. She wanted to hear about my classes, but mostly she wanted to hear me laugh. "You sound lighter," she said once. like you're finally walking on your own side of the street. By the time graduation rolled around 4 years later, I had a degree, a portfolio, and a plan. Instead of applying for office jobs, I took a chance on myself and filed taxes as a freelancer. Clients kept coming, checks got bigger. I saved for travel, took my first flight out west, wrote from coffee shops in Seattle, Austin, Santa Fe. Each new city felt like another brick in the wall I'd started building in Grandma's kitchen. I wasn't healed. Not yet. But I was free enough to start. By my mid-20s, my laptop had become my office and my passport. I rented short-term rooms through apps, worked from library tables, coffee shops, even the back seat of a friend's car on a road trip. I wrote blog posts for a gardening company from a motel in Utah, product descriptions for a tech startup from a porch swing in Georgia, and an entire white paper for an NGO while snow fell outside a cabin in Vermont. It wasn't glamorous. Wi-Fi outages, deadlines at 2 a.m., meals of gas station trail mix, but it was mine. Each invoice I sent felt like another mile between me and the girl who'd been thrown out of her own home. I sent Grandma postcards from every stop, always drawing a tiny door on the back. She taped them to her fridge until it looked like a patchwork quilt. 2 years in, one of my regular clients introduced me to a major lifestyle brand that needed a whole series of blogs and product pages. The contract was larger than anything I'd imagined. I worked late nights for weeks, terrified I'd mess it up, and when it went live, their marketing director wrote, "You've given our products a voice." I posted a screenshot of the review on Instagram as a quiet celebration. That screenshot changed everything. Other brands reached out, writers reposted my story. A local business podcast invited me to speak about freelancing. Then my old college contacted me and asked if I'd come give a seminar on building a writing career. Standing at the front of that classroom, looking at students leaning forward with notebooks open, I felt a strange click inside, as if the loop had closed and the hallway of my past had turned into a room of my own making. By the time I returned to Grandma's for the weekend, she had taped the seminar flyer to her hummingbird calendar. "You're in print," she said, tapping it with her finger. "You're being seen." I wasn't rich yet, but I was steady, respected, and, most important, untethered. Each gig, each talk, each plane ticket was another proof that I could build something no rumor could tear down. The week after my seminar at the college was a blur of work and travel. I spent 2 nights in a hotel room in Chicago with a view of the river that looked like green glass, writing copy for a skincare brand during the day, and answering student emails about freelancing at night. My Instagram following had doubled after the seminar video was reposted by a big writing account. Even my old English teacher from River Street had messaged me, "So proud of you." I got back to Grandma's apartment late on a Thursday. She'd left a plate of meatloaf and a note on the counter in her careful script. "Warm this up. Don't forget salad. Proud of you." I heated the meatloaf, poured myself iced tea, and scrolled my phone. 6 missed calls from Mom. I stared at the screen as if it belonged to someone else. The contact photo was a blurry, years-old snapshot from when we'd gone apple picking as kids, Nathan and me in flannel, Mom squinting in the sun. I hadn't seen her name flash across my phone in over a decade. My thumb hovered over "call back" so long the screen went dark. I paced the kitchen. The apartment was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. My heart did a strange thing, faster but also hollow. I thought of all the times I'd waited for her call when I was at Grandma's at 14, suspended and bewildered, thinking surely any minute she'd ring and say, "Come home, sweetheart. It was all a mistake." She never had. And now she was calling? I called back. She picked up on the first ring. "Honey," she said brightly, and in that one word I heard every holiday commercial ever made, every forced smile over a family dinner, every time she'd said my name like a chore. "Is everything okay?" I asked. "Oh yes, everything's fine." Her voice dipped as if she were about to cry, but didn't. "We saw you on TV." I blinked. "You... what?" "That little interview you did on Channel 9 about writing careers, you looked so polished." She laughed, high and nervous. "Your father and I watched it together." I heard a chair scrape, a man's throat clear. "We're proud of you," Dad said stiffly, like a teacher reading off a cue card. "You've done well for yourself." I stood by the window, meatloaf forgotten, staring at the streetlights making halos on the pavement. "Thanks," I said, my voice flat. They asked about my work. I answered in short, factual bursts. Clients, travel, the seminar. It was like small talk at a wedding with someone you don't want to see again. Then Dad asked, too casually, "So how much are you earning these days?" "Excuse me?" "Well," he said, chuckling in a way that wasn't funny, "we're family. You don't have to be shy." "I'm not shy," I said. "It's none of your business." There was a pause, then Mom's voice, softer, coaxing. "We're retired now, honey. The house needs renovations. The roof leaks. We've been trying to save, but—" She trailed off, waiting. I didn't answer. "You've been so successful," she tried again. "Your success gives us hope. We thought maybe you could help us out, just a little." Dad jumped in, firmer. "After all, we're family. You should share some of your good fortune." I walked into the living room, phone to my ear, and stared at the wall of postcards and little doors. My reflection in the dark TV screen looked calm, but my heart was hammering. "You haven't spoken to me in years," I said. "You threw me out. You believed lies about me. And now you're calling because you need money?" "You're being ungrateful," Mom snapped, the brightness gone from her voice. "We raised you." "No," I said quietly. "Grandma raised me." Silence. I could feel the old dynamic trying to pull me back, the undertow of guilt and obligation. But something in me had calcified into a backbone over these years of building my own life. "If you want my help," I said, "you'll have to meet my condition." Dad's suspicion came through the line. "What condition?" "You have to tell the truth," I said. "Publicly. In front of our family. Admit that Nathan spread lies about me. Admit that you believed him and threw me out. Own what you did." "That's ridiculous," Mom hissed. "We can discuss this privately." "No," I said. "Publicly. The way you humiliated me." Dad's voice rose. "I am your father. It's your duty to help your family." "I'm not your safety net," I said. "I'm not your scapegoat. You wanted a reset? This is it." They sputtered. They tried coaxing, guilt, indignation. I stayed firm. "If you can't do that," I said finally, "don't call me again." I hung up before they could answer. My hands were shaking. The meatloaf on the counter had gone cold. Grandma came out of her room tying the belt of her robe. "I heard voices," she said softly. "Everything okay?" I looked at her, and suddenly the tightness in my chest cracked. "They called," I whispered. "They want money." She put her arm around my shoulders and steered me to the couch. "Of course they do," she murmured. "They've seen you shine." "I gave them an ultimatum," I said. "I told them to admit the truth publicly or never call again." Grandma's eyes, still sharp under their hood of wrinkles, met mine. "Good girl," she said simply. We sat there in the quiet apartment, the postcards on the fridge, the hum of the refrigerator filling the silence. Outside, a delivery truck rumbled down Main Street. My phone buzzed once on the coffee table and went still. I didn't pick it up. For the first time in years, I felt not just free, but anchored, like I'd built a life with enough weight to resist the pull of the past. The morning after that phone call, my phone was a beehive, missed calls, texts, voicemails. Mom's voice high and brittle in one message. "Honey, please don't be rash." Dad's voice in another, gruff and wounded. "We deserve better from you." Even Nathan, whose number I hadn't saved but recognized instantly, had sent a smug little paragraph about how Mom and Dad will never do what you're asking, so stop being so selfish. Each time the screen lit up, my stomach tightened. I muted notifications, turned the phone face down, made coffee, and tried to work. But the words on my laptop blurred. The coffee went cold. I sat at the kitchen table, hands around the mug, looking at the hummingbird calendar, at all the little doors drawn on the postcards taped to the fridge. I thought of the girl I had been at 14, sitting on the bottom step of that house while Dad packed my suitcase, whispering pleas to people who weren't listening. My heart beat faster, but not from fear, from anger, clean and clear like a bell. "They think they still own your story," Grandma said when she saw my face. She was kneading bread dough, forearms dusted with flour. "Maybe it's time you took it back." That night, after she went to bed, I sat at the little desk in my room and opened a blank email. The blue-white light of the screen made the shadows look deep. I cracked my knuckles, took a breath, and started to type. I wrote to my parents, but also to every aunt, uncle, and cousin whose address I had, to old family friends who had been at birthday parties, to the people who had shaken their heads and said, "Such a shame," when I disappeared from the family photo album. I wrote in the first person, present tense, the way I'd learned to do in my writing to make readers feel a heartbeat in the words. I described the house on the edge of town, the birthday parties where Nathan got the balloons and I got a token cupcake, the door ripped off my room, the rumor that metastasized into a suspension, the night my father packed my suitcase while I begged, how Grandma had come like a one-woman cavalry and scooped me up. Then I wrote about what had happened since. The library job, the new school, the postcards, the scholarship, the writing, the travel. I wrote about my own healing too, because I wanted them to see that survival was not a straight line. And at the end, in a new paragraph, I attached the screenshot Nathan had sent me after my parents' call, the one where he admitted lying. His exact words, "I admit that I did lie about you 15 years ago, but it's been a long time since then, so stop being so selfish." I looked at that line a long time, the audacity of it, the way he tried to frame a confession as an inconvenience, my pain as an obligation. I pasted it into the email beneath a single sentence. "Here is the truth you've all been living without for 15 years. By the time I was finished, it was nearly 2 a.m. My fingers trembled from typing. The apartment was silent, except for the tick of the clock and the slow, steady breathing from Grandma's room. I read the whole thing twice, out loud, to the empty kitchen. Then I hit send. The next morning, my phone exploded. Pings and vibrations like a drum line. I put it on silent, made tea, and sat at the table. Grandma joined me, hair still in curlers. "You did it," she said. It wasn't a question. "I did it," I said. We didn't check messages until afternoon. When we finally did, the screen was a cascade of subject lines and previews. "I had no idea. I'm so sorry. We should have been there." Cousins I hadn't spoken to in years wrote long, stumbling apologies. An aunt who had always adored Nathan but kept her distance from me wrote, "I'm ashamed of myself." A neighbor from our old street sent a short note, "I believe you." And then the other kind of messages, from my parents and brother. They shifted quickly from pleading to angry to threatening. Dad accused me of dragging family matters into the street. Mom said I was hurting your father's health. Nathan sent a series of texts full of name-calling and condescension, culminating in a line that made my stomach drop. "You'll regret this." I showed the messages to Grandma. She put on her glasses, read them slowly, and then reached for the phone. "We're going to call a lawyer," she said. The lawyer she found was a small, precise man named Mr. Galvez, who had an office above a bakery. He listened without interrupting, asked to see the texts, and nodded. "This is harassment," he said. "We'll send a cease and desist. If they keep contacting you, we'll escalate." 2 days later, a certified letter went out. The next day, silence. No calls, no texts. The quiet felt like standing in a field after a storm, the air still full of ozone, but the sky a clear, improbable blue. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt tired, shaky, like a runner crossing a finish line alone. But there was also something else under the exhaustion. Relief. Not the brittle kind that breaks, but the deep, settling kind that lets your shoulders drop. Grandma poured 2 mugs of tea and clinked hers gently against mine. "You told your story," she said. "Now they have to live with it." That evening, as the sun set behind the courthouse, I opened my laptop and logged off every app. I walked to the fire escape where our herbs were lined up in their coffee cans. The mint had gone wild, the rosemary tough and fragrant. I pinched a leaf, rolled it between my fingers, breathed in the green smell. In the street below, a kid rode by on a bike with playing cards in the spokes, so it made a sound like applause. Inside, Grandma was humming as she folded laundry. I closed the window, turned back to my desk, and opened a new document. The cursor blinked, patient. For once, I wasn't writing for a client. I was writing for me. I typed, "It took me 15 years to stop being the villain in someone else's story. Now I'm writing my own." I leaned back, closed my eyes, and let the silence sit. It didn't feel like emptiness anymore. It felt like space. 2 years have passed since the night I sent that email. The postcards still cover Grandma's fridge, but there are new ones now. Lisbon, Vancouver, the Grand Canyon. Places I went not because I was running, but because I wanted to go. My passport has stamps. My savings account has commas. My days have a rhythm I built myself. I moved out of Grandma's apartment the winter after the cease and desist letter. Not because I wanted distance from her, but because I was finally ready to stand on my own feet. I found a small loft in Columbus with brick walls and a view of a mural of a girl reading a book that takes up the side of a building. The first night I slept there, I locked the door from the inside and slid the key under my pillow, a ritual as familiar as prayer. Grandma visits most weekends. She brings Tupperware full of chili, herbs from the fire escape garden, and the latest gossip from Main Street. We drink tea at my little kitchen table, the sunlight falling across our mugs, and she smiles every time she sees my name printed on a byline. "You're doing it," she says, shaking her head. "You really did it." I go to therapy now. Every Wednesday at 3 p.m., I sit on a soft gray couch and talk about things I used to hide. The way panic still flickers under my skin when the phone rings, the anger that sometimes surprises me, the parts of me that still believe I have to earn my place at the table. My therapist, a woman with kind eyes and a dry sense of humor, teaches me how to breathe through it. "You survived," she says. "Now you get to live." Living looks like mornings spent running by the river, afternoons writing for clients I choose, evenings reading books I never had time for in school. It looks like saying no without flinching. It looks like turning down projects that don't align with my values and raising my rates without apology. It looks like taking Grandma on a trip to New Orleans for her birthday and watching her dance to a jazz band on Frenchman Street. My parents never met my condition. They didn't apologize publicly. They sent a few guarded emails at first. "Let's put the past behind us." But when I didn't respond, the messages stopped. Nathan married and moved to another state. I don't follow their lives. I don't need to. The silence isn't punishment anymore. It's a boundary. Sometimes I still dream of that house on the edge of town. In the dream, the door to my old room is back on its hinges, and I'm standing in the doorway. But instead of going in, I turn away and walk down the hall, out the front door, into daylight. When I wake up, my heart is steady. The dream doesn't haunt me, it tells me what I've done. On my desk in the loft, there's a framed photograph. Me at my college seminar, standing at the front of the classroom with a marker in my hand. Someone captured the moment just as I was laughing at a student's joke. My posture is open, my face unguarded. Every time I look at it, I see proof of the life I built from scraps. A room with a door, a voice that can tell the truth, hands that write my own story. Last month, a publishing house reached out about turning my journey into a book. "Your story could help a lot of young people," the editor wrote. I told her I'd think about it, because that's the real victory, the ability to choose. Sometimes, when Grandma visits, we still sit on the fire escape, now lined with potted herbs. The mint is wild again. The rosemary is tall and woody. We sip tea and watch the city go by. She'll pat my knee and say, "Seatbelt," out of habit, and we'll both laugh. The phrase has become a shorthand between us, a way of saying, "You're safe, you're buckled in, you're home." I'm not healed all the way. Healing isn't a finish line, it's a practice. But I'm no longer the girl begging to be believed. I'm the woman who built a life anyway. One evening this spring, as the sun set orange over the mural, I opened a fresh notebook. On the first page, I wrote, "I learned to love doors, and then I learned to walk through them." I closed the book, breathed in the smell of mint and ink and spring air, and felt the quiet settle around me. It didn't feel empty. It felt like space. Space I had made, space I could fill. And for the first time, I felt completely, unshakably mine.